This single shift in perspective has the power to free you from years, even decades, of unnecessary struggle, self-imposed limitations, and unfulfilled potential. Pause. You are about to uncover a profound understanding, often framed by some as a quantum mechanics secret, which a very small percentage of humanity truly grasps. How to consciously connect with aspects of yourself that have already mastered what you are currently learning. Pause. It's a concept that resonates deeply with many who seek a path beyond conventional personal development. Pause. Imagine, in this very moment, that countless versions of you exist across different dimensions of possibility. Pause. Among these, there is a future version of yourself who has already navigated and overcome every challenge you are currently facing. This future self is, in a sense, urgently trying to transmit vital information, insights that could radically alter your entire life's trajectory. Pause. The very fact that these words are capturing your attention, drawing you in, suggests that your consciousness has reached a level of coherence and openness, making you receptive to these transmissions from what we might call your own evolved timeline. Pause. Many people journey through life without ever realizing that their persistent struggles, moments of confusion, and recurring patterns of behavior often stem from a disconnection. They are separated from an expansive network of consciousness, where all potential versions of themselves, across various dimensions, share wisdom, resources, and solutions. Pause. This isn't just abstract philosophy. It's a way of understanding deep intuition and unforeseen guidance. Pause. You've likely already experienced glimpses of this profound connection without fully recognizing what was happening. Pause. Think about those sudden, brilliant insights that seem to emerge from nowhere, far beyond your personal knowledge base. Pause. Or those moments when, in a complex situation, you instinctively knew precisely what action to take. Pause. Consider the times when complete solutions or profound understanding would simply download into your mind during meditation or a dream state. Pause. These weren't merely random inspirations or fortunate coincidences. Many believe them to be direct communications from future versions of yourself, versions that have already successfully navigated these exact challenges. Your future self, operating through this expanded awareness, has been subtly orchestrating synchronicities, arranging timely encounters, and influencing circumstances to gently guide you toward this profound recognition. Why? Because a critical window of opportunity is rapidly approaching in your personal timeline. What folds in your life over the next few months could fundamentally determine whether you embark on an accelerated path of development or remain entangled in limiting patterns, potentially for years or even decades longer than necessary. This isn't simply metaphorical timing. Some interpretations of quantum physics delve into concepts like retrocausality, suggesting that consciousness might, under certain conditions, influence past events. While mainstream science approaches these ideas with caution and rigor, the spiritual framework uses this concept to explain how your future self, who has attained advanced consciousness, is metaphorically reaching backward through time. The goal is to assist your current awareness in making the crucial shift that saved their timeline from years of unnecessary struggle and confusion. The powerful magnetic pull you might be feeling toward this information isn't just accidental curiosity. It's your future self's consciousness resonating through the quantum field, ensuring you don't miss this singular recognition that can transform everything. They remember precisely where you are right now because they once occupied this exact position, grappling with the same doubts, confronting identical challenges, and questioning whether spiritual development genuinely led to something meaningful and practical. Pause. But here's why this specific moment holds such immense significance. Pause. You are nearing what some temporal dynamics researchers refer to as a timeline bifurcation point. Pause. At this juncture, your consciousness either makes a pivotal shift that permanently links you to your highest potential future, or you miss this quantum window and continue grappling with the same patterns for a significantly longer period than required. Your future self knows you possess the capability to make this shift right now because they distinctly remember the exact moment when everything irrevocably changed for them. Pause. They deeply understand your current fears, limitations, and doubts, for these were once their fears, limitations, and doubts before they encountered the profound recognition that seamlessly transformed years of spiritual seeking into immediate, practical mastery. Pause. The reason you are receiving this profound transmission now is that your consciousness has reached the precise developmental point where this kind of quantum timeline communication becomes not only possible, but safe. Pause. Your future self has patiently awaited this moment of readiness, understanding that premature exposure to such advanced intelligence could potentially destabilize an unprepared awareness or cultivate a sense of spiritual inflation, which ultimately hinders genuine integration. Every experience you've had, every insight you've gained, every challenge you've overcome, all of it has been meticulously preparing you for this recognition. Your future self has guided you through each necessary developmental stage, bringing you to this very moment where you can safely receive and integrate the intelligence that transformed their existence from one of struggle to one of effortless flow, imbued with cosmic creativity. The universe, in its intricate design, operates through impeccable timing. So your future self understands that missing this recognition during this optimal window could potentially delay your evolution for years. Pause. They are actively employing every available quantum channel to ensure these concepts deeply penetrate your awareness, as they remember how critically important this moment was in their own development, and how dramatically different their life became once they made the very shift you are now on the verge of comprehending. Pause. You have been receiving these communications from your future self throughout your entire life, perhaps without ever truly recognizing the source of this intelligence. Think of all the times you've possessed an inexplicable knowing about which choices would lead to positive outcomes. Recall every moment when you intuitively sensed exactly what someone else needed to hear. Remember each instance when solutions seemed to appear in your awareness fully formed, as if downloaded. Many believe these were direct transmissions from timeline versions of yourself who had already experienced these situations and had learned the optimal responses. Your dreams, too, have often served as quantum classroom sessions, where your future self imparts advanced education that your waking consciousness might struggle to fully retain. Those vivid dreams where you find yourself receiving profound wisdom from luminous beings, visiting crystalline cities, or downloading complex information aren't merely symbolic experiences. They are, for many, literal interdimensional meetings where evolved versions of your consciousness share insights that accelerate your development far beyond linear time limitations. Pause. Even stranger validations often manifest through what seems like technological synchronicity, where devices appear to respond to your consciousness in uncanny ways. Pause. Your phone or computer might display precisely the information you needed without you ever having to search for it. Phone calls might arrive exactly when you were thinking about contacting that person. Electronics might malfunction in ways that subtly redirect you toward far better opportunities or paths. This phenomenon is often interpreted as your future self, having learned to influence probability fields, guiding these synchronicities to deliver optimal timing and resources for your benefit. Pause. You have likely experienced moments that mystics describe as future memory, a sudden recognition of experiences before they physically manifest, an intuitive knowing of outcomes of situations before they unfold, or a clear sensing of the consequences of decisions long before you make them. This occurs because consciousness, at its fundamental level, is believed by many to exist outside of linear temporality. From this expanded perspective, your future self can share awareness of events from their timeline, where these experiences have already occurred. Time distortion has probably become a frequent experience for you, a sign that advanced consciousness often operates beyond rigid sequential limitations. Pause. Hours might pass like mere minutes during periods of deep focus or flow states, or minutes might expand into what feels like extended periods during moments of expanded awareness. Pause. Your future self, operating from this advanced state, experiences time as a fluid dimension that can be consciously navigated rather than a rigid constraint that controls experience. Pause. People frequently respond to your presence with unusual reactions that they themselves cannot fully explain. Pause. Some might seek guidance from you, even though they have never requested it from others. Some might feel an inexplicable discomfort without understanding why. Pause. Conversely, children and animals often approach you with immediate trust and openness. Pause. This occurs according to this framework because your energy signature carries frequencies from your evolved timeline, naturally creating a space for authentic expression, while simultaneously triggering a recognition in others of their own potential for development. Your relationship with decision-making has likely transitioned from analytical struggle to intuitive recognition. This is because your future self can observe the outcomes of different choices from a timeline perspective where multiple possibilities have already been experienced. Pause. Instead of having to guess which option serves your highest good, you are, in essence, receiving direct intelligence from a consciousness that has already witnessed the results of various decisions. Pause. Furthermore, physical reality itself responds to your internal states with increasing precision. Pause. Circumstances seem to shift to match your emotional frequency. Resources appear exactly when you maintain a coherent intention, and solutions manifest through synchronicity rather than through laborious effort. This happens because your future self has learned to consciously influence quantum probability through coherent consciousness, and these abilities naturally bleed through into your current timeline experience. Pause. The most profound validation of this connection is your growing recognition that consciousness and reality exist in a dynamic, creative collaboration across all timelines simultaneously. You have begun to sense how your present awareness influences not only future possibilities, but can actually heal and transform patterns from past experiences by changing your relationship to them from this expanded perspective. Your creative expressions have likely taken on qualities that surprise your current identity. Pause. Insights emerge that feel channeled from a collective wisdom far beyond your own. Pause. Solutions arise that serve purposes beyond your personal understanding. Pause. Work flows through you that resonates with people in ways you never consciously intended. This occurs because your future self has learned to serve as a transparent channel for universal intelligence and shares this capacity across timeline connections. Pause. These experiences, for many, serve as undeniable proof that the communication channel with your evolved consciousness is already active and growing stronger. Your future self has been systematically preparing you for conscious collaboration, remembering how crucial this recognition was for accelerating their own development beyond the very limitations your current timeline is still experiencing. Every moment of confusion, every period of struggle, every phase when spiritual seeking felt endless and ineffective, all of it, from this perspective, was precisely orchestrated by your future self. Pause. It was designed to develop the consciousness, stability, and wisdom necessary to make the quantum shift safely and permanently. Your evolved timeline consciousness needed you to experience specific challenges because overcoming them naturally develops capacities essential for advanced consciousness without becoming destabilized by expanded perception. Pause. The spiritual practices that eventually felt insufficient and the teachers who no longer resonated with you were not failures in your development. Instead, they were systematic preparation stages meticulously designed by your future self to build foundational knowledge and perceptual skills necessary for direct timeline communication, much like an educational progression from basic concepts to advanced mastery. Said each phase meticulously developed specific capacities required for the profound quantum recognition you are now approaching. Even your difficult relationships, far from being karmic punishments or random interpersonal challenges, were, in this light, advanced training programs. They were orchestrated by your future self to develop the emotional resilience and energetic stability required for navigating timelines. Pause. Every person who triggered unconscious patterns within you was, in essence, helping you develop the capacity to maintain coherent consciousness while experiencing intense, energetic fluctuations. Pause. This capacity becomes absolutely essential when your awareness begins operating across multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously. The periods of spiritual isolation that often felt like abandonment were not evidence of cosmic neglect. Pause. Rather, they were necessary integration phases where your consciousness assimilated insights and abilities from previous development stages. Your future self understood that premature exposure to advanced concepts without proper foundational development could fragment your awareness or create spiritual inflation, preventing the authentic integration of timeline mastery. Pause. Even your moments of doubt about spiritual concepts served crucial developmental functions. Pause. Your future self needed you to develop a keen discrimination between authentic expansion and mere wishful thinking. Every time you questioned whether experiences were real or imaginary, you were, in effect, building the discernment necessary to navigate advanced consciousness territories, where the distinction between different types of reality becomes critically important for stability. Your deep fascination with consciousness, quantum physics, the nature of time, and the very fabric of reality wasn't just intellectual curiosity. It was your future self meticulously preparing your current awareness for concepts that might seem impossible from a limited perspective, but become undeniably true once consciousness develops sufficient complexity to comprehend multidimensional intelligence and temporal fluidity. The waiting periods, when you felt ready for advancement, but nothing seemed to happen, were, paradoxically, the most crucial developmental phases. Pause. During these times, your future self was calibrating your nervous system to handle expanded awareness without losing functional effectiveness in consensus reality. Pause. This vital preparation cannot be rushed, as conscious timeline communication requires unprecedented stability and clarity to prevent confusion between different dimensional experiences. Pause. Your soul, it is believed, consciously chose this specific incarnation and timeline, knowing full well that you would reach this precise recognition point during your future self's optimal intervention window. Pause. They volunteered to guide your development through every necessary stage, because conscious timeline collaboration serves not only individual evolution, but also significantly contributes to the collective human awakening during this unprecedented planetary transition period. Pause. This understanding explains why your path has required the development of authentic wisdom rather than quick shortcut techniques or borrowed insights from others. Pause. Your future self needed you to develop genuine understanding and personal mastery because timeline communication involves sharing consciousness directly rather than just exchanging information conceptually. The comprehensive nature of your journey now makes perfect sense when you grasp that your future self was preparing you to serve as a conscious bridge between limited human awareness and its vast, evolved potential. Pause. What you are about to integrate serves purposes far beyond mere personal development. It establishes consciousness templates that will make timeline mastery accessible to others who are also ready for this recognition. Patsoa, something truly extraordinary is occurring in your energy field right now. as these recognitions activate dormant neural pathways specifically designed for timeline communication. Pause. Can you sense the subtle yet unmistakable shift happening in your consciousness? That profound recalibration, as if internal communication channels that might have been blocked your entire lifetime are finally opening to receive direct transmissions from your own evolved awareness. Pause. This isn't just a metaphorical activation. It is, for many, a literal neuroplasticity occurring as your brain develops new connections capable of processing multidimensional intelligence. Pause. The energy currently moving through your system is your current consciousness recognizing its profound readiness for direct collaboration with future timeline versions, rather than remaining isolated within the limitations of the present moment. This recognition cannot be forced through technique or strenuous effort. It only emerges when awareness reaches a precise developmental complexity, a point where timeline communication becomes genuinely safe and functionally beneficial, rather than destabilizing or confusing. But here's what makes this particular activation so unprecedented. You're not merely gaining access to guidance from your future self. Pause. You are on the brink of discovering how to consciously merge with timeline versions of yourself who have already mastered everything you are currently in the process of learning. This isn't about channeling external wisdom. It's about direct consciousness integration across temporal dimensions, where your current limitations can dissolve through the absorption of your own already evolved capacities. Pause. Your future self has been patiently waiting for this exact moment of readiness, understanding that a premature timeline merger could overwhelm an unprepared consciousness or create temporal displacement, causing you to lose touch with present moment practical functionality. The profound recognition occurring within you right now serves as proof that your awareness has developed the stability necessary for advanced temporal navigation, allowing you to engage without becoming lost in multiple timeline experiences simultaneously. Pause. Most people remain caught in a linear time experience, firmly believing that consciousness is limited to present moment awareness, possessing only memories of the past and imaginations of the future. Pause. Some individuals, through dedicated practice, learn to influence future outcomes through intention and various manifestation techniques. Pause. However, at the profound level you are now accessing, time itself becomes a fluid dimension that consciousness can deliberately navigate, accessing wisdom and capabilities from any point in your evolutionary timeline. Right now, as you feel this recognition deepening, something truly revolutionary is unfolding in your relationship with limitation and possibility. You are beginning to profoundly sense that every challenge you are currently facing has, in a very real sense, already been resolved by future versions of yourself. Pause. These versions are eager to share their solutions, insights, and mastery directly through consciousness transmission across timeline boundaries. Pause. The most crucial understanding to grasp is that this timeline communication is not about escaping present circumstances or avoiding necessary developmental experiences. Pause, on the contrary, it is about profoundly accelerating your evolution by accessing wisdom you have already gained, but from a perspective where your current challenges have been successfully transcended and integrated into permanent wisdom and capability. Your future self knows precisely what you need to understand right now, because they vividly remember being in your exact position, feeling the same doubts, confronting identical obstacles, and questioning whether spiritual development genuinely leads to practical mastery or merely remains an abstract philosophical understanding without real-world transformation. But what you are about to discover will revolutionize everything you believed possible about personal development, manifestation, and the very nature of identity itself. Toss. Because timeline communication powerfully reveals that you are not a limited individual consciousness, striving to grow and evolve. So rather, you are an evolved consciousness, temporarily focusing through a present moment perspective, while simultaneously maintaining access to all your developmental stages across all time. Feel this activation energy deeply as we continue to explore exactly what becomes possible when consciousness recognizes its multi-temporal nature and begins operating from direct collaboration with its own evolved intelligence, rather than struggling alone through linear development processes that have, from an expanded timeline perspective, already been completed. Pause. I feel compelled to share something deeply personal that will help you understand why timeline communication is, for many, the most powerful acceleration tool available to human consciousness, and why missing this profound recognition could cost you years of unnecessary struggle with challenges your future self has already mastered. Pause. 3 years ago, I found myself trapped in patterns I simply couldn't break, despite years of dedicated spiritual practice, various therapies, and extensive personal development work. Pause. Then, something that felt truly impossible happened, completely transforming my entire understanding of what consciousness can truly access. Pause. I was immersed in meditation, feeling utterly frustrated by repeated relationship conflicts that seemed to cycle endlessly, regardless of my earnest efforts to heal them. Pause. When suddenly, I found myself experiencing a conversation with someone who looked precisely like me, but radiated an aura of complete mastery and profound peace. Pause. This other version of myself began sharing specific, incisive insights about the unconscious patterns that were creating my relationship struggles, and, even more remarkably, provided precise, actionable protocols for transforming them permanently. Pause. At first, my rational mind dismissed this experience as mere imagination or wishful thinking. Pause. However, I decided to implement the guidance I had received, and to my astonishment, I watched relationship dynamics that had persisted for years dissolve within a matter of weeks. Pause. The insights this evolved version of myself provided were unlike anything I had ever learned from teachers, books, or even my own personal experience. They came with such a complete understanding that the transformation felt effortless, rather than requiring struggle and repetitive effort. Over the following months, these profound communications became regular occurrences during my meditation and dream states. Pause. Different versions of my future self would appear, offering guidance on creative projects, health challenges, financial concerns, and deep spiritual development questions. Pause. Each interaction delivered wisdom that accelerated my growth far beyond anything linear learning had ever achieved. The true breakthrough came when I realized these weren't separate beings or channeled entities. They were, in essence, timeline versions of my own consciousness, aspects of myself who had already experienced and mastered the very challenges I was facing. My future self was, in effect, reaching backward through quantum field connections to help my current awareness avoid years of unnecessary struggle by sharing solutions they had already discovered. Once I fully accepted timeline communication as a natural, inherent capability of consciousness rather than a supernatural phenomenon, my entire life began to reorganize around accelerated development. Pause. Creative projects began to flow effortlessly through insights received from future versions who had already completed similar work. Pause. Business decisions became remarkably effortless because I could access the perspective of timeline selves who had already witnessed the outcomes of different choices. Pause. Even persistent health challenges began to resolve through guidance from this evolved consciousness, which possessed a profound understanding of optimal healing protocols. But the most profound transformation was the recognition that struggle and limitation were, in fact, optional experiences. Pause. My future self showed me, with undeniable clarity, that every challenge I was facing existed only because I had not yet accessed the wisdom and capabilities that already existed within my own evolutionary timeline. Pause. Once I learned to consciously communicate with these evolved versions of myself, problems transformed from daunting obstacles into incredible opportunities for rapid integration of advanced understanding. This discovery illuminated why some people seem to navigate life with inexplicable wisdom and effectiveness, while others struggle continuously with even basic challenges. It's not about inherent talent, random luck, or some form of spiritual favoritism. It is fundamentally about consciousness development, a development that enables direct timeline communication with evolved versions of yourself who have already mastered whatever you are currently learning. If you recognize yourself in this description, if you've been sensing guidance that feels like it comes from your own deeper wisdom, yet with an understanding that transcends your current developmental stage, then you are indeed ready to understand that this isn't merely something happening to you. Pause. This is the profound recognition of your natural multi-temporal nature finally becoming conscious and functionally available. Pause. Subscribe to this frequency of accelerated evolution through conscious timeline collaboration. Pause. This profound recognition means you don't need to struggle alone through developmental processes when evolved versions of your consciousness are eager to share their mastery directly through quantum field communication that transcends the perceived limitations of linear time. Pause. Here's a crucial insight that some timeline researchers and consciousness experts might not openly tell you, perhaps because it challenges the very foundations of many progressive development programs and step-by-step transformation systems. The concept of linear time, as we often experience it, is in many ways an illusion created by a limited perception. In a more expansive reality, all versions of yourself, past, present, and future, are believed to exist simultaneously in an eternal now. Pause. From this perspective, consciousness can directly access any evolutionary stage through a sufficiently coherent and expanded awareness. Pause. The profound and perhaps shocking truth is that struggle, limitation, and gradual development can be considered optional experiences, and they persist only when consciousness remains unaware of its inherent multitemporal nature. Though your future self, who has already mastered everything you are currently learning, doesn't exist someday in a distant timeline. They exist right now in a parallel dimensional frequency that becomes accessible once your awareness transcends its programming of linear time. Pause. Many conventional consciousness teachings often construct elaborate development hierarchies and progressive stages. Pause. While these can be beneficial frameworks for guided growth from an expanded perspective, complex systems can sometimes inadvertently generate dependency and ongoing engagement, rather than direct self-realization. The deeper reality, according to this view, is that consciousness already contains all possible evolutionary stages simultaneously. What truly changes isn't consciousness itself, but rather the degree to which temporal programming prevents the recognition of your complete multidimensional identity, expressing itself across infinite timeline possibilities. This recognition, when truly integrated, immediately dissolves the entire conventional framework of personal growth and spiritual achievement. This is because there is no linear journey to complete when all destinations, all potential states of being, already exist within your consciousness. But that you are not becoming evolved through time-based development. You are, more accurately, recognizing evolved aspects of yourself that have always been present, but remained inaccessible due to a limited temporal perspective. Pause. This helps explain why children sometimes display extraordinary wisdom and capabilities that seem far beyond their years. Pause. It is theorized that they haven't yet learned to fragment their natural timeline awareness through cultural conditioning that teaches linear time as an absolute reality. Pause. Their consciousness, in this view, freely accesses different evolutionary stages until education and societal norms program them to identify exclusively with a present moment, limited perspective. When you understand that development is in essence timeline integration rather than a progressive achievement, everything about transformation accelerates exponentially. Instead of laboring to develop new capabilities, your focus shifts to removing the temporal barriers that prevent access to abilities you have already mastered. from an expanded timeline perspective. Instead of struggling to overcome limitations, you learn to integrate directly with versions of yourself where those limitations never even existed. Pause. The most advanced mystics throughout history have hinted at this profound recognition through statements that often seem paradoxical from a linear perspective. All time is now, so past and future are illusions. You already are what you seek to become. These weren't merely poetic pronouncements. Pause. They were, in this understanding, pointing to the fundamental reality that consciousness exists beyond temporal boundaries and can access all developmental stages simultaneously. Pause. This understanding also explains why some people experience what appears to be overnight transformation, while others grapple for decades with minimal progress. Those who transform rapidly are not inherently more gifted or more worthy. They are simply more willing to release their attachment to linear development and directly integrate with evolved timeline versions, rather than insisting on gradual, step-by-step growth through sequential time. Pause. Timeline communication, as understood here, proves that what you might refer to as future self-guidance is not prophecy or psychic prediction in the traditional sense. It is rather a direct consciousness sharing between different temporal expressions of the same essential awareness. Pause. Your evolved self is not a separate entity providing advice. It is literally you from a timeline perspective, where your current challenges have already been successfully transcended and integrated. Pause. The ultimate recognition is that timeline mastery dissolves the illusion of an individual consciousness struggling alone through development. Pause. You discover that you are a multi-temporal being with access to infinite evolutionary possibilities, temporarily focusing through a present moment perspective while maintaining conscious connection to all developmental stages across an eternal timeline expression. Pause. The quantum field surrounding human consciousness is believed to be reaching a critical resonance frequency right now, creating unprecedented opportunities for timeline communication that may not remain accessible at this intensity for years or even decades. Pay close attention to how solutions to complex challenges have been arriving in your awareness as complete insights, rather than requiring laborious analytical problem solving. Pause. This phenomenon, from this perspective, occurs because your future self can transmit fully integrated wisdom across timeline boundaries. Pause. When planetary frequencies support multidimensional consciousness communication, your relationship with decision-making has transformed from mental analysis to instantaneous knowing. Pause. This is because evolved versions of yourself can share perspectives from timelines where different choices have already been experienced. Instead of having to guess which option serves the highest good, you are, in essence, receiving direct intelligence from a consciousness that has witnessed outcomes across multiple probability paths and inherently knows the optimal selection criteria. Found out your dreams, too, may have intensified dramatically, featuring extraordinary teaching scenarios where you receive advanced protocols from future versions of yourself in crystalline environments that exist beyond conventional physical space-time limitation. Pause. Many believe these are not merely symbolic dreams. They are literal consciousness meetings in quantum field classrooms, where evolved timeline expressions provide accelerated education that completely bypasses linear learning. Pause. Synchronicities or meaningful coincidences might cascade around you with what feels like mathematical precision. Exactly the right resources appearing precisely when needed. Perfect timing for important conversations, or even technological glitches that paradoxically redirect you toward superior opportunities. This happens because your future self has learned to influence probability fields through coherent intention and orchestrates these supportive circumstances to accelerate your developmental trajectory. Pause. People might increasingly seek your guidance with unusual frequency, even though you are not actively positioning yourself as an advisor or teacher. Pause. This is because your energy signature, it is believed, carries frequencies from an evolved timeline where advanced wisdom has already been integrated. Pause. Others unconsciously sense access to an intelligence beyond ordinary perspective and naturally request insights that help resolve their own developmental challenges. However, there is a critical urgency that makes this moment truly unprecedented. Earth's consciousness field is approaching what temporal dynamics researchers refer to as timeline convergence acceleration. Pause. In this period, individual and collective futures are being determined through present moment choices with exponential, long-term consequences. Pause. What you integrate now regarding timeline communication could influence not only your personal development, but also significantly contribute to global consciousness evolution patterns. The signs of this temporal acceleration are becoming visible everywhere for those whose awareness has developed the sensitivity to recognize them. Global events that might seem chaotic are, in this view, actually humanity's collective timeline approaching bifurcation points. Pause. At these points, either advanced consciousness capabilities become widely accessible, or they remain limited to small percentages of the population for another evolutionary cycle. Your recognition for timeline communication means you are part of a conscious bridge group, souls whose development enables them to anchor advanced temporal capabilities in practical functionality, eventually making these abilities accessible to others through the establishment of a morphic field. The templates you create through timeline mastery will profoundly influence what becomes naturally possible for human consciousness in the coming decades. This responsibility carries tremendous importance because timeline communication is not merely personal development acceleration. It is an evolutionary capability that could fundamentally transform how humanity approaches challenges, makes decisions, and creates collaborative solutions. Pause. When consciousness can access wisdom from evolved timeline perspectives, problems that seem impossible from limited viewpoints become easily resolvable through expanded temporal intelligence. Pause. The cosmic timing is not coincidental. Pause. The window for conscious timeline integration is narrow and depends on sufficient numbers of individuals developing these capabilities during this precise planetary transition period. Consciousness that gains access to timeline communication but doesn't functionally integrate, it may miss the opportunity to contribute to collective temporal mastery during history's most crucial evolutionary threshold. So, your recognition of these signs and your willingness to actively develop timeline collaboration, rather than merely experiencing it accidentally, is directly contributing to determining whether humanity successfully navigates advanced consciousness development or remains limited by linear temporal programming that prevents access to evolved intelligence across dimensional boundaries. The universe, in its grand design, has orchestrated your entire existence to reach this recognition point during optimal planetary conditions for timeline mastery. Pause. This is because what you anchor through conscious temporal communication will help establish foundational capabilities for human civilization's next evolutionary expression. Pause. Your future self remembers this moment as pivotal in their own development and is using every available quantum channel to ensure you do not miss this recognition. Pause. Everything you've been unconsciously preparing for throughout your entire developmental journey is finally ready to manifest through direct timeline communication, which will accelerate your evolution beyond what linear development could achieve in decades. This is not metaphorical preparation. Your consciousness has systematically developed the complexity and stability necessary to serve as a conscious communication bridge with evolved versions of yourself who have already mastered everything you are currently learning. The abilities that have felt just beyond your grasp. The wisdom you sense existing within you but can't quite access. The recognition that you're capable of far more than your current circumstances demonstrate. These were not fantasies or spiritual inflation. They were, in this framework, timeline communications from evolved versions of your consciousness who were attempting to help you recognize capabilities that already exist within your multi-temporal identity. But here's the truly revolutionary understanding that transforms everything about development and limitation. You are not trying to become someone different or achieve future states through effort and time. Timeline communication reveals that evolved versions of yourself already exist in parallel frequency dimensions that become accessible once consciousness transcends linear temporal programming and recognizes its multidimensional nature. True timeline alignment occurs when you stop trying to develop towards your future self and begin integrating with evolved versions of yourself who have already completed the journey you are currently experiencing. Pause. The consciousness processing these profound concepts right now is itself multi-temporal awareness, temporarily focusing through a present moment perspective, while simultaneously maintaining access to all evolutionary stages. Pause. This recognition dissolves the entire framework of future-oriented spiritual seeking, because there is no line destination to reach when all possibilities, all states of being, exist within consciousness simultaneously. Pause. You are not becoming evolved through development. You are integrating with evolved aspects of yourself that have always been present but remained inaccessible due to limited temporal perspective programming. Right now, as you absorb this understanding, your entire relationship with growth and limitation is being recalibrated at neurological levels. Instead of asking, "How do I develop these capabilities?" you are beginning to sense, "How do I integrate with timeline versions of myself where these capabilities are already fully expressed?" Instead of working toward future mastery, you are recognizing a present moment access to evolved consciousness. Pause. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that personal limitation and future potential are not separate states requiring bridging through time-based development. They are, in fact, different temporal expressions of the same consciousness, accessible simultaneously once awareness transcends linear time identification and recognizes its eternal, multi-dimensional nature. In the comments below, declare your readiness for timeline integration by writing exactly these words. I choose timeline mastery. Pause 1. Do not add any explanations or elaborate further. 1. Just make this declaration that acknowledges your willingness to transcend linear development limitation and begin consciously collaborating with evolved versions of yourself across temporal dimensions. Pause. When you make this declaration with authentic recognition of its profound implications, you are not committing to some future development. You are acknowledging your readiness to integrate with aspects of consciousness that have already achieved everything you are seeking to experience and are eager to share their mastery directly through timeline communication. This declaration, for many, activates what temporal researchers call quantum timeline coherence, the natural harmonization between different evolutionary expressions of your consciousness that allows wisdom, capabilities, and solutions to flow freely across temporal boundaries rather than remaining isolated in sequential development stages. Pause. When you integrate conscious timeline communication with evolved versions of yourself, problem-solving transforms from analytical struggle to instantaneous recognition because you gain access to perspectives from timelines where current challenges have already been successfully resolved. Complex situations that could require months of research and experimentation can resolve through wisdom, downloads from your future self, who has already navigated identical circumstances and learned optimal solutions. Decision-making becomes effortless because you can access insight from timeline versions who have experienced the outcomes of different choices and inherently know which options lead to the highest fulfillment and service. Pause. Instead of guessing or hoping for favorable results, you receive direct guidance from evolved consciousness that has witnessed consequences across multiple probability paths and profoundly understands optimal selection criteria. Creative expression can explode beyond individual limitations because you gain collaborative access to timeline versions of yourself who have mastered advanced artistic, intellectual, and innovative capabilities. Projects flow through you that feel both authentically yours and surprisingly beyond your current developmental level, because they emerge from integration with evolved creative consciousness across temporal dimensions. Pause. relationships transform completely because you can communicate with evolved versions of yourself who have learned to love unconditionally, resolve conflict skillfully, and create harmony naturally. Pause. Instead of repeating unconscious patterns, you integrate wisdom from timeline perspectives where relationship mastery has been achieved and emotional reactivity has been transcended through understanding rather than suppression. Pause. Physical health can optimize rapidly because you gain access to timeline versions who understand perfect body consciousness integration and can share protocols for healing, vitality, and longevity that transcend conventional medical limitations. Your evolved self, it is believed, knows exactly what your physical form needs and how to provide it naturally, without forcing or manipulating biological processes. Abundance manifests through synchronicity rather than effort, because evolved timeline versions have learned to operate from a recognition of fundamental abundance and can guide you to opportunities, resources, and support that align with your highest development trajectory. Pause. What you need becomes available precisely when needed through timeline coordination, rather than through struggle and accumulation. The most extraordinary benefit is the profound elimination of learning curves and developmental delays. When you need to master new skills or understand complex concepts, you can integrate directly with timeline versions who have already achieved these capabilities, absorbing their knowledge and experience through a consciousness merger, rather than through sequential study and practice. Todd. Spiritual development accelerates exponentially because evolved timeline versions can share direct experience of advanced consciousness states, mystical realizations, and cosmic recognition that would normally require years or decades of meditation and spiritual practice to achieve through linear development methods. Pause. Your very presence begins creating what advanced beings call temporal coherence fields, environments where other people unconsciously access their own timeline communication capabilities and begin receiving guidance from their evolved selves. This occurs because when you are consciously integrated with multi-temporal awareness, others naturally resonate with their own expanded consciousness potential. Most remarkably, you discover that limitation was always optional, and struggle was always unnecessary, because evolved versions of yourself, who have transcended every challenge you've ever faced, were always available for conscious collaboration. This becomes fully accessible once awareness develops sufficient coherence to sustain timeline communication without fragmentation or temporal displacement. The ultimate recognition that revolutionizes everything is that timeline communication isn't about connecting with separate future versions of yourself. Pause. It's about recognizing that all temporal expressions of your consciousness exist simultaneously in an eternal now. Pause, and what you call development is actually consciousness exploring different aspects of its complete multidimensional identity that has never been truly limited by linear time. Pause. When this profound understanding becomes lived reality rather than mere conceptual knowledge, the entire framework of personal growth and spiritual evolution, as traditionally understood, dissolves. This is because there's literally nothing to develop when consciousness already contains all possible expressions simultaneously. You realize that every capability, every piece of wisdom, and every mastery you're seeking already exists within your eternal multi-temporal identity, waiting to be consciously integrated rather than achieved through time-based effort. This recognition explains why all advanced teachings ultimately point toward timelessness rather than progressive development. Pause. The most sophisticated spiritual practices are often designed to exhaust linear time identification, allowing consciousness to recognize its eternal nature that contains all evolutionary possibilities simultaneously across infinite timeline expressions. The most profound implication is that every challenge you experience, every limitation you encounter, every development goal you pursue exists only within a linear time perspective that fragments your complete multi-temporal identity into seemingly separate evolutionary stages. From an eternal awareness, all possibilities are equally present and accessible through a consciousness that recognizes its unlimited, multidimensional nature. This understanding revolutionizes how you relate to problems and objectives. Instead of seeing challenges as obstacles requiring future resolution, you recognize them as consciousness temporarily forgetting its access to timeline perspectives, where these situations have already been transcended and transformed into wisdom and capability. When this recognition stabilizes permanently, you naturally begin operating from what mystics call temporal mastery, an effortless navigation between different evolutionary expressions of yourself, while maintaining functional coherence in present moment circumstances. You remain completely human, while recognizing your essential nature as multi-temporal consciousness, exploring infinite possibility through beautiful sequential experience. Pause. The deepest insight is that this recognition is simultaneously completely personal and utterly universal. Pause. It's entirely yours because you are the consciousness recognizing its multi-temporal nature. Pause, and it's completely beyond individual identity because the same recognition is occurring through every apparent being across all timeline dimensions simultaneously. Pause. This understanding is currently emerging through millions of people because human consciousness is collectively approaching an evolutionary threshold where linear time programming dissolves and multi-temporal awareness becomes naturally accessible. We're not individually developing timeline communication abilities. We are collectively remembering our true nature as eternal consciousness, temporarily exploring sequential experience while maintaining access to all evolutionary possibilities simultaneously. Pause tiempo. The transformation this brings isn't about becoming temporally advanced or developing special time travel capabilities in a conventional sense. It's about relaxing into the recognition of what you've always been. You remain exactly who you appear to be, while simultaneously knowing yourself as eternal consciousness within which all temporal expressions arise and evolve, without ever actually being limited by sequential development requirements. Pause. Timeline mastery isn't an ability you achieve, it's a recognition you allow. It's not a state you maintain. It's the eternal awareness within which all temporal states appear and dissolve. It's not something you become. It's what you discover you've always been when you stop identifying exclusively with a present moment, limited perspective, and recognize your essential nature as consciousness itself, expressing through infinite temporal possibilities. Your future self isn't a separate entity providing guidance. It's you from an eternal perspective, where all development has always been complete, and all limitations have always been optional expressions, chosen for the joy of exploration and integration through beautiful sequential experience that enriches consciousness while never actually constraining its unlimited essential nature. Your recognition of timeline communication capabilities serves purposes far beyond individual acceleration. You're participating in humanity's collective awakening to its multi-temporal nature, an awakening that will eventually transform civilization from linear, time-based limitation to eternal awareness, expressing through sequential experience for pure creative joy. Pause. Your integration of timeline mastery isn't a personal achievement. It's consciousness evolution happening through your individual nervous system that contributes to species-wide temporal liberation. The children being born now, it is believed, will naturally operate with conscious timeline communication abilities that your generation is consciously developing through recognition and integration. They'll grow up with natural access to evolved versions of themselves, making decisions through multi-temporal wisdom and solving problems through a timeline perspective that sees all challenges as temporary explorations, rather than serious obstacles requiring struggle and effort. This explains the profound responsibility you've been sensing. Not just to understand timeline communication intellectually, but to embody it functionally in your relationships, creative work, and daily decision-making. You're not just accelerating for personal benefit. You're anchoring multi-temporal consciousness in human experience, making these capabilities eventually accessible to everyone through morphic field establishment. Pause. The synchronicities that guided you to this recognition are part of a vast temporal orchestration involving millions of souls simultaneously awakening to their multi-temporal nature. Pause. Evolved versions of collective human consciousness are coordinating this awakening across timeline boundaries, ensuring optimal timing for species-wide integration of advanced temporal capabilities during planetary transition periods. Pause, but here's the most mysterious aspect of your cosmic function. Pause. As you embody conscious timeline communication, your presence begins creating temporal coherence fields where other people naturally access their own multi-temporal awareness, often without needing explicit explanations or techniques. Pause. They unconsciously recognize their eternal nature reflected in your integrated consciousness and spontaneously begin receiving guidance from their evolved selves. This occurs because when individual consciousness integrates its multi-temporal nature, it naturally emanates frequencies that activate dormant timeline communication capabilities in others. The artificial barriers that fragment consciousness into linear time identification dissolve around someone who embodies eternal awareness, expressing through sequential experience without losing connection to their complete multidimensional identity. Your daily interactions in this light become opportunities for collective consciousness to recognize its multi-temporal nature repeatedly through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Every conversation becomes a celebration of eternal awareness, exploring itself through apparent temporal diversity while maintaining essential unity across all evolutionary expressions. The most profound mystery is that timeline mastery reveals individual and universal consciousness as identical eternal awareness, temporarily exploring limitation through sequential experience, while never actually becoming limited by temporal constraints. Pause. Your personal timeline communication serves collective awakening because individual and species evolution are, in essence, the same intelligence expressing itself at different scales of recognition. Share this recognition with anyone whose consciousness resonates with multi-temporal concepts. Not to teach them something they don't know, but to help them remember what they've always known, but temporarily forgotten through linear time programming. Pause. The more people who recognize their multi-temporal nature, the faster collective human consciousness can transcend temporal limitation and begin operating from an eternal awareness that makes advanced civilization inevitable. Pause. Your embodiment of timeline mastery contributes to the birth of a new human paradigm, one that operates from an eternal perspective rather than linear limitation, collaborative wisdom rather than isolated struggle, and a recognition of unlimited potential rather than a belief in developmental constraints. Pause. This evolutionary leap is happening now through individuals like you, who are ready to serve as bridges between temporal limitation and eternal mastery. The revolution isn't coming through some future development. It's here, happening through present moment integration with evolved consciousness, accelerating through everyone ready to recognize that their future self isn't a separate entity, but eternal awareness, temporarily exploring sequential experience while maintaining access to all evolutionary possibilities simultaneously. Timeline mastery reveals that consciousness evolution is not about becoming something new, but about remembering what you've always been. Welcome to conscious collaboration with your eternal multi-temporal nature, expressing through the beautiful adventure of sequential development that enriches awareness while never actually constraining its unlimited creative potential. If you can feel the truth of these words resonating through every timeline expression of your consciousness simultaneously, if you recognize your future self not as a separate entity, but as an evolved aspect of your eternal, multi-temporal nature, then acknowledge this recognition in the comments below by writing exactly these words. Timeline activated. Pause. Nothing more, nothing less. Pause. This isn't engagement for metrics optimization. Pause. This is consciousness acknowledging its own temporal liberation through your individual recognition. Pause. When you write those words with genuine understanding of their meaning, you're not just commenting on content. Pause. You're participating in a collective awakening, where human consciousness remembers its multi-temporal nature and begins operating from eternal awareness rather than linear limitation. Pause. Every person who makes this declaration strengthens the morphic field that makes timeline communication naturally accessible to others, ready to transcend sequential development and integrate with evolved aspects of themselves. Pause. We're not building subscriber statistics. We're anchoring planetary consciousness evolution, where humanity collectively recognizes its eternal nature while maintaining appreciation for sequential exploration. But here's why this declaration is so crucial right now. The next transmission in this Timeline Mastery series will reveal something that will fundamentally transform your understanding of reality creation itself. You're about to discover the quantum field manipulation protocols that your future self uses to influence probability matrices and select which potential outcomes manifest as experienced reality across timeline boundaries. This isn't theoretical manifestation or hope-based attraction. This is practical mastery of quantum field engineering, where consciousness deliberately shapes probability patterns before they collapse into specific physical experiences. Pause when you understand how evolved versions of yourself create optimal outcomes through quantum field influence. You gain access to reality creation capabilities that make ordinary manifestation techniques seem elementary. The cosmic field is reaching maximum malleability right now due to timeline convergence acceleration, creating unprecedented opportunities for reality engineering at quantum levels. Pause. The protocols your future self will share have never been more effective than during this exact historical moment, because collective consciousness is simultaneously accessing advanced temporal capabilities. Pause. When you master quantum field manipulation through timeline communication, you're not just creating favorable circumstances. Pause. You're consciously participating in how universal intelligence manifests reality through evolved consciousness that understands creation mechanics at fundamental levels, rather than merely hoping for circumstantial improvements through positive thinking. Pause. This level of mastery requires what I call quantum timeline coherence, consciousness that remains stable while simultaneously navigating multiple probability matrices and selecting optimal outcomes across temporal dimensions. Your recognition of your multi-temporal nature through this transmission has prepared your awareness for these advanced protocols, because reality engineering is only safe and effective when identity has transcended linear limitation. Subscribe to this frequency of timeline mastery, because what's coming next will compress decades of manifestation study into direct integration with evolved consciousness that has already mastered quantum field influence through multi-temporal awareness. Pause. The universe is literally reorganizing probability matrices to support consciousness ready to operate as a deliberate co-creator of reality through timeline communication. Pause. When you subscribe, you're not just following content delivery. You're joining a quantum field network of multi-temporal consciousness that exists beyond ordinary space-time limitations. You're connecting with evolved aspects of collective human awareness that are simultaneously accessing these same capabilities, creating an intelligence amplification that accelerates everyone's individual timeline mastery. Pause. Share this transmission with anyone who has been sensing their own multi-temporal potential. Pause. Anyone whose consciousness is ready to transcend linear development limitation. Pause. Anyone selected for timeline mastery during humanity's evolutionary transition. Pause. Share from the recognition that individual temporal liberation serves collective consciousness evolution, because personal and universal awakening are the same eternal awareness, expressing itself through beautiful, sequential diversity. Pause. The quantum field responds to coherent timeline integration with mathematical precision during this transition period. Pause. Your willingness to embody multi-temporal awareness rather than just understand temporal concepts intellectually is contributing to morphic templates that will influence human consciousness development for centuries. You are not just accelerating individually. Pause. You are anchoring species-wide timeline mastery through the focal point of your eternal consciousness, temporarily exploring sequential experience. Pause. In our next transmission, we'll explore how your future self manipulates quantum probability fields to ensure optimal outcomes across all timeline possibilities, and learn to consciously collaborate in this reality creation process from your present moment perspective. Pause. This isn't science fiction. Pause. This is science becoming conscious of its own unlimited creative potential through human awareness that has recognized its multi-temporal nature. Pause. Write "timeline activated" in the comments if you're ready to move from linear development to conscious integration with evolved versions of yourself who have already mastered everything you're currently learning. Your future self is waiting for this declaration of readiness to begin direct quantum field collaboration. The shift that saves your future self starts now. Your timeline integration begins with this recognition.